Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura's Handmade Haven. Welcome or welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. We're continuing on with our happy hour quilt sew along, and we are on block 5. This week we're going to be working on the chocolate covered cherry espresso martini. There's a lot of words in that drink, but believe me, it is so super yummy. So make sure you check the description box down below for your cocktail and mocktail recipes so you can enjoy the drink along with making the block. So this week you're going to gather up quite a few fabrics. We actually have 5 different fabrics in this block. It's going to start with this gorgeous forest green, and then we're also going to have the scarlet red, a linen, a gingerbread, and a chocolate. All of these are the cotton shot line from benartex fabrics, and they are absolutely stunning. It is making this quilt so cute and so beautiful. Once it comes all together, I just cannot wait to hang it on my wall in my living room and share those photos with you. So this week, just to kind of speed up the process, I've done a little bit of the work beforehand, and I am going to talk you through a couple things that I did just for some shortcuts, but we're going to head to the cutting table so I can go through those very quickly. As I said, I have gone ahead and done all of the tracing and the cutting for the fabrics this week. The first one I'm going to talk about is this chocolate bar for our block, and what I would do with this is just use your template and then just use your ruler and just lay your ruler on the template underneath your pellon, and then just trace your lines and then move it and trace your lines for the 4 sides on that, just to speed that up, and then you don't have to worry about them being perfectly straight because you'll use your ruler and they will be straight. The other thing that I would want to point out to you is that I am having you cut a chocolate strip and a linen strip, and that's going to be our espresso martini drink because we're going to have some froth on our espresso martini. So that the lengths on these do need to be 6.5 inches, just so they're easy to piece together before we put them together as an applique piece. I do have some of the forest bias tape here cut, and then we also have a little bit of a forest for our leaf. Those are all pretty easy to do. And then we also have 1 piece of the cherry fabric, the scarlet fabric rather, for the cherries. And then the last piece of fabric that I cut was for the gingerbread. And this is going to be the little bars that are on the chocolate. And what I've done is I've just cut a long strip from my gingerbread fabric. And then what I did, these little squares for the chocolate bar are 1 3/4 by 3/4. So what I did on my pellon was just draw a line at the top and down the side of my ruler as far as I had space, and then I simply drew the other side at 1 3/4, lining that up, and then I moved the ruler down 3/4, and then I left 1/2 inch in between, and then 3/4, and worked my way on down that strip. So then I have 1 long strip of those chocolate bar pieces, and that will fit onto my gingerbread perfectly well, and I will be able to sew those up pretty quickly. So let's head on over to the sewing machine and we will sew up our shapes, and then we will get them turned out, pressed, glue basted, appliqued, and have our block together. One thing we want to do before we head to the sewing machine is go ahead and trace our drink glass onto the background wallpaper inset for our block. Now the martini glass is going to be 3.5 inches from the left, and that's going to be pretty much centered on the block. It might be a little bit off, but it's not going to be enough to matter because we do have that chocolate bar and the cherries that will kind of balance the block out for us. So if you want to measure 3.5 inches from the left-hand side of your block, you're going to be pretty close to the center. Now you are definitely welcome to go ahead and make sure it's perfectly aligned in center, but this is going to be close enough for me. Remember, we're 1/2 inch up from the bottom. Because that stem is so long and straight, I am going to go ahead and just use my ruler to make sure I have a straight stem all the way up the glass. I'm going to do the same thing for the cup part of the glass. Just using my ruler to lay right on that line and then drawing a line. This just makes it a lot easier than trying to do it by hand. All right, so now we have our martini glass onto our wallpaper inset. We can put our light pad away, and we are ready to go do our shapes. All right, in case you haven't watched my videos before, I do just want to go through my basic machine setup. I am using the Juki DX7. I like to use the Schmetz Microtech needles. I also have the clear presser foot on my machine just because that's what I like to use for when I'm sewing my shapes. I'm using a Mettler 100% cotton silk finish top and bobbin thread, and it's just a white color. It doesn't really matter what color the stitching for this is. Now on the Juki DX7, the default setting for the straight stitch is 2.4 wide and 2 long. I have decreased that to 2.0 long. So I have decreased. Now on the Juki DX7, the default stitch length for a straight stitch is 2.4. I've decreased that down to 2.0. Now, even though the templates show these corners rounded for the chocolate bar and the pieces, I am just kind of making a 90 degree angle there. I'm not worrying about that rounded because I know that when I turn this shape out, it's not going to be a super sharp point anyway. So I'll have a nice little rounded corner. So that's just a little tip for you. Don't worry about those little rounded corners too much on these pieces because you're going to get them when you flip them out. Now, obviously I cut this fabric a lot longer than I needed to, but it's just going to help me get these done pretty quickly. So I'm just going to go down this entire side. I'm going to snip off this first little piece that I sewed up. Trust the process here. Now you can definitely go around each rectangle individually, and we will do that. But for right now, we're doing a little shortcut. So we went down both sides of all 9 of the chocolate bars. And now we're just going to go back and forth in between, kind of creating a railroad feel. And these will turn out fine. Just a little tip, a little shortcut. Now, if you did a pistachio cream espresso martini for block 2, here is the cherry that you need. You will use the leaf and the cherry from the espresso martini block to create your cherry for the garnish on your pistachio espresso martini. So that's where your cherry is coming from. There are 3 cherries on this block. Makes it very bright and cheery. I have to say the espresso martini is probably my absolute favorite cocktail of all time. And I like all the variations too. The pistachio cream espresso martini is also very good. And this one is really good. This is a chocolate covered cherry espresso martini. You use a little bit of a chocolate Baileys or a chocolate liqueur, a little bit of cherry juice, or when I made the cherry bounce, I also made some cherry vodka. And I've been using some cherry vodka in my espresso martinis just to give it a little extra zing, and I really like that too. I just enjoy kind of playing with the drinks a little bit and deciding, what I like and what I don't. I mean, obviously, if you've had a few cocktails in your life, then you know what you like and what you don't. There are some liqueurs that you probably don't care for, and there are others that you do. So I just kind of like coming up with different variations of drinks, kind of give them my own twist. All right, the last piece for this block is the drink itself. And the first thing we're gonna do is just sew the piece of linen to the top, one of the long sides, to the long side of the chocolate cotton shot. Now, just in case you missed that and you're wondering, I did a little cheat there. My Juki, I love it so much. My Juki has a setting on it where it will do a 1/4 inch seam allowance for me automatically. So I just kind of ask it to do that instead of having to get out my 1/4 inch piecing foot. So for the drink itself, this is like a customization for you on the quilt to decide for yourself. You have quite a bit of the linen up here, and that's your froth on your espresso martini. So do you want a lot of froth or a little froth? And that is totally up to you. Now I usually have right around 1/4 of an inch, I believe, up there at the top. But you know what? We might need a little extra little froth today. And just try to keep it level across there. If you need to, just measure down and make sure this is even across. So I think that looks pretty good. All right, so now we're gonna trim them and turn them out. There are quite a few shapes in this block. We have 10 in the chocolate bar alone, and then the 3 cherries and the 1 leaf and then the drink. So what is that? Is that 14, 15 shapes? That's probably the most shapes we've had so far in any of the blocks. None of them are too difficult. I would say just maybe the cherries. The cherries might be the most difficult one to turn, but it's not even that much work. You can handle it. The one thing I would suggest with the cherries is right here in this concave area up top, just make sure you clip down in there just to give that a little leeway when you go to turn it. That way your fabric will lay really nice and your shape will look like a cherry and not just a oval. Just like the leaves we did last week, make sure you go flat across that tip and angle them out a little bit just to reduce the bulk in the fabric on that tip. That'll give you a nice point on your leaf. The chocolate bar is pretty easy to trim off. You do want to angle across those corners. So I'd like to know, are you guys using the interfacing method or are you doing some fusible? You could definitely do some fusible on these as well. You wouldn't have to change anything really, just use the templates as they are. If you are doing needle turn, you would have to build in your seam allowance. So you'd want to make everything 1/4 of an inch bigger than it is. So you have that little piece that you would turn in. I'm kind of trying to do a little cheat on these two just to speed up the process on them. Just cutting all the way down that side. This is for the 9 chocolate squares. Just be sure you don't cut through your corner seams. All right, so now we just need to use our sharp pointed Fisker scissors to cut through that interfacing, and then we'll turn all these shapes out. Easiest one first. Turn out that chocolate bar. Use our 2-point turner in the corners. Next we'll do our martini. Now on that martini, hopefully you notice I did angle the corners up at the top, just like we have on all of our other 90-degree angles. Now I want these corners to be a little sharper, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my stiletto. And I know you guys have seen me do this before on some of the leaves, I believe. And you're just going to poke down in the center and kind of pull it out. And I'll snip that one little thread off and you'll never know it. It'll be fine. Just kind of angle it down in that corner and then pull out. All right, so the cherries, it's basically just the same thing. You're just gonna turn the shape out and then run the 2-point turner around the outside edge. Now the cherries, since they are smaller, it does take a little more patience. But then once this is pressed, it's gonna look perfect. And then just push against the fabric side of the shape and you'll kind of be able to kind of shape it and stretch it a little bit, I guess I would say. That way you can get that nice curve in the top of the cherry. Okay, so there's one. I'll have 2 more of those to do. And the same thing with the leaf. As we've done other weeks, you're just going to turn the shape out. Use your 2-point turner. Pushing around on the fabric side of the shape. And then finally, I'm going to show you how to do one of the chocolate bar squares, and then I'll get the rest of these done and we'll meet back up at the ironing board. Now, the chocolate bar squares are not difficult at all. They're just little rectangles. So you'll be able to quickly and easily get these turned out. They are small, but they're not difficult. There's nothing too crazy with them to do. So just use your 2-point turner, poke out those corners a little bit. What's even better about these is that they don't necessarily have to be, you don't want the sharp point corners anyway. You want it to be kind of rounded. So, just get it as good as you can and it will be fine. All right, so there's one. I have 8 more of those to do, 2 more cherries, and then we'll meet back up at the ironing board to do our pressing and glue basting. All right, so we are back at the ironing board and we have some bias tape to make, some shapes to press, and everything to glue baste out. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just grab my 1/4-inch bias tape maker and the awl. And we're gonna make some bias tape first. I definitely cut my fabric longer for the bias tape than I actually need bias tape, but that's okay because there's some other blocks coming up that will also need some green. So anything I have left over from this week, I'll just save for another block. All right, so now that I have my fabric started, I'm gonna grab my iron and press it on the end. If you have not made bias tape with a bias tape maker, oh my goodness, I think that you should definitely invest in the bias tape makers. They are worth their weight in gold. They work so well. Makes making bias tape very, very easy. Now this is straight grain bias tape, so it doesn't really curve that much, although we are going to press a little bit of curve into one piece for our cherry stems. Because you can, even though it's straight grain bias tape, you can still get a little bit of a curve in it, enough for a cherry stem. We just need to press all of our shapes. We have a bunch of shapes for this block, but it's going to be super cute when we're done. The first thing we're going to do is put our drink in the martini glass, and we're just going to put a few dots of glue up there, just enough to hold it in place, and we're basically going to center that drink in the glass between the embroidery lines. Now the chocolate bar is going to be kind of at an angle, going from one side of the glass to the other. I don't want that angle to be the same as the glass. I want it to be different. So I'm going to make sure that I move this a little differently than the angle of the top of the martini glass. I'm just going to glue baste that into place. And again, it doesn't take a lot of glue, just a few little dots, just to hold it enough that it will stay. Then we're going to float our cherry right here on our martini. And I'm going to put 1 dot of glue at the bottom of that cherry. I don't want to glue baste the top because I want to be able to stitch the top, the linen behind that cherry. And then I'm going to take my little green stem here. I'm just going to bend it back upon itself. This will be the top of my cherry stem. Then I'm going to do my cherry stem. I'm going to use my iron to pull a little bit of a curve into my cherry stem. And I'm just going to kind of just place it up here and see what I think, how long I want that stem to be. And then keep in mind that you want to cut it so you can still put a little dot of glue at the top edge and bend it back upon itself to have a nice finished end for your cherry stem. And then I'm just going to lay this on here. I'm actually just going to take my bias tape and put a couple little dots of glue down the stem, flip that around, and then my stem will go right into place on my block. That will be perfect. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is put all of these little rectangles onto our chocolate bar. And the way this is laid out is there are 3 rows of 3. And they're pretty tight, but they can all fit on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put 3 dots, just like that. I'm going to lay out the first row going down. And then I'm going to do 2 over. Kind of evenly space those across there. Now you can measure this out if you want to. I'm just not going to do that. It's going to be close enough is good enough. And then I can just fill in the other 4 after you have those first 5. The first row, column and row, then you can fill in the other 4 pretty easily. Now if you want to kind of flip these up and put an extra little dot of glue here and there, you can definitely do that. I probably will, just to be safe, just to make sure everybody stays how I want them to. And then I am going to heat press that too real quick. Now I am not going to put these final cherries on this block yet. And the reason is I want to be able to applique all of that without having to worry about going around these cherries. So I'm going to go and applique down the chocolate bar and probably a portion of the martini. And then we'll come back and add our last 2 cherries to the block. Then we'll go back and applique the cherries down. So the 2 cherries and the leaf will be hanging out over here. Let's go to the sewing machine to do a little applique to get started. All right, for the applique stitch, I do have my Juki DX7 set on a zigzag, and it is a small zigzag, so it's 1.8 wide and 0.8 long. So I am just going to start here at the corner of the chocolate bar, and I'm going to applique the big rectangle into place. And then I'm going to start up here on the drink itself, and I'm going to start right at the bottom of the froth with a stay stitch. The needle's on the right hand side on those bottom corners, and ending a stay stitch right at the bottom of the froth as well. I'm going to switch to, I think I'm going to go ahead and do the froth color. So I'm going to switch to this kind of a caramely brown color. The cotton shot fabric is linen for the froth on our Espresso Martini. And I'm going to start right behind the cherry. And I'm going to do the froth on the top and the bottom, just because I think that extra little bit of zigzag there will make it look like the froth is even foamier. Now, since the stem is also behind the cherry, I don't have to worry about sewing over it here. I can just go ahead and leave it in place and sew right over it. Now let's tackle those 9 little rectangles down below. Now, instead of cutting my thread between each of these little rectangles, I'm just raising the needle and moving to the next one, and I'll go back and cut the threads later. That's just going to give me a little more insurance to make sure that I don't have my machine come unthreaded for me. Okay, now we're going to go back to the ironing board and do our other 2 cherries, get them glue basted down, and then come back and finish up our applique. Okay, for the final 2 cherries, this is my recommendation. I would say place them on the chocolate bar where you want them and glue baste them into place, and then add the stems. So we're going to glue baste the bottom of the cherry so we can lift it up for the stem, and then the stems can curve up a little too. And you can either, do this with your iron, or you can just try to glue it into place. Either way will probably work because it's not going to be that big of a curve. I am going to go ahead and press a curve into the first one though. just to give it a little bit of a little oomph. I'm going to cut this up here, and then this one will just go up to meet it. So I'm just going to flip this over and put a couple little dots of glue down towards the bottom of the stem, not the top, but just the bottom. And that stem will actually go behind the longer one. And the longer one, you want to put a little dot of glue, bend that back. And then again, we're just going to put a few little dots of glue down the stem on the bias tape itself. Flip it over and move it into place. And those few little dots of glue will help hold it where you want it. And then last, we're going to put our little leaf. And it's just going to be kind of angled off of the top of the stem. Just like that. All right, so if you are interested in measurements on this, this stem is about 2¼ inches long. This one is 3½ inches long, so 3¾ with that end tucked under at the top. And then this one is another 2½ inches long with that top tucked under at the top. So those are your measurements: 2½, 3½, 2½. And then we're going to go do our applique. We'll start with the green first because it's on the bottom. Then we'll do our cherries. Then we'll do the embroidery for the glass, which, oops, I'm glad I mentioned that. Let's grab our 3-in-1 pen. And we're going to draw down our glass because this chocolate bar is behind our martini glass. So we want to put the white chalk lines down, and then we're also going to angle that in. Needs to be just a smidge higher. I think we'll remember that when we're embroidering, but just in case, we'll run a little thicker line there. Okay, so that will finish up our embroidery lines for our martini glass. All right, we are going to start with the cherry stems. Now on these lower cherries, we're going to start with the shorter cherry stem. And actually, I think we're going to start right here. Now because of the way this leaf is positioned, I can just jump right over here and do the leaf. Then last up, we'll be appliquing the cherries before we'll start doing the embroidery for the martini glass. Just as a reminder, I'm using a satin stitch for the embroidery of the actual glass itself. I have that set at 1.8 wide and 0.3 long, so it's a tiny, tight little satin stitch. All right. So it's up to you where you start with this. You're going to have to go all the way around the glass. I am going to start right here in this little inner part with a stay stitch. Now on this curve, you're going to want to stop with your needle on the right hand side so you can make that turn as smooth as possible. And you'll probably want to do that, you know, to make that turn 2 or 3 times around that edge of the glass. And then it's just straight across the bottom. And then you'll do the same thing on the other side. This is one of the blocks in the quilt that symmetry will be your enemy. But just try to follow the line as closely as possible and you should be pretty good. Now for this inner point here, you're going to stop with your needle on the left-hand side. So when you go up the stem, it will be a nice turn. And then for spacing, I just like to keep my the left side of my presser foot on top of the drink itself. And that kind of keeps the spacing between the outside of the glass, the embroidery for the glass, and the drink just, consistently spaced around the drink. Now these points are super sharp up here, and I would stop with your needle on the right-hand side. And since the cherry is floating on top of our drink, we will go right across that cherry. And again, stop with your needle on the right-hand side before going down the opposite side of the drink. All right, let's get this pressed and then onto the background fabric. All right, so we're gonna start with a stay stitch on the lower right-hand corner of the block, and we're just gonna use that tiny zigzag to applique the wallpaper inset to the background fabric for the block. Then we will trim it down to the 12.5-inch square and have our reveal. I'm gonna give this another good press and then we'll trim it up. Okay, so I have this set over on the cutting table with my 12.5-inch ruler on top of the block. If you've been watching the sew along, then you know that our blocks are scored to 12.5 inches. You have an inch above and below and about a 1.5-inch gap on each side. So I'm just going to use my rotary cutter and trim this down. Let's get it on the design wall. Here's our latest cocktail mocktail for our happy hour quilt. This is our chocolate covered cherry espresso martini. I love this block so much. Those cherries are so super cute. The little leaf on the 2 cherry stems just adds a nice little pop of fun, and that chocolate bar was not as bad as you thought it was going to be. So this was super fun to do. The embroidery for the martini glass turned out great. The wallpaper inset, which is that medallion cloud, just gives a nice little wallpaper pop off that black cotton shot fabric from benartex. And I love the way this fabric is just really highlighting each of the drinks, and I love how the quilt is coming together. I hope you're as excited as I am to continue progressing with our happy hour quilt. It's been super fun to share tips and tricks with you guys and to share my first original design with all of you. If you have comments or suggestions, please leave them down below. Don't forget to check the description box for your updated templates and for that cocktail and mocktail recipe for the chocolate covered cherry espresso martini. I love that you guys have been so engaged and reaching out and leaving comments. I really appreciate that. Please continue to share out my channel and my social media accounts with your friends and all of your fellow quilting lovers. I would love to hear from them too. If you liked today's video, please make sure you give me a thumbs up. If you have not subscribed to the channel, make sure you do so and hit the bell for notifications. Until next time, find joy in all you do, carve out some time for crafting and creating, and remember, it's always better when you make stuff up.